One of the biggest questions I'm asked at the moment is what would I recommend as a budget gaming PC? Now, there's not a lot out there at the moment really worth buying. The GPUs and CPU prices aren't that good, they're still quite high, and a lot of the offerings from the current and new generations are either not available or they've just started to cater for the top end of the market more than anything. Now, I've not known what to recommend up till now, but since playing with a load of parts recently and doing a lot of benchmarking, I think I've got something that would actually suit. So before we get into parts, let's take a look at our requirements. Now, we want a machine that is a budget machine, and a budget is different for everybody, but we're going to look at being underneath the £200 mark. We want something that can be upgraded. Okay, there's nothing that really out there is future proof, but there are certain combinations that we can put together which will give us the ability to upgrade in the near future. We also want something that will straight away be able to play games. Now, if we target some of the more indie games or the more competitive games, we can get away with having a much lower spec up front. Now, to meet some of these requirements, you can simply buy a Dell Optiplex and drop in a graphics card. Now, due to the current market in graphics cards being quite expensive and the incompatibilities on a lot of those Dell Optiplex machines, because you've pretty much stuck on the socket in the processor you've got, or the RAM could be specific, even sometimes down to the PSUs are pretty specific, so you can't upgrade them. You're going to be stuck with being able to put in a very low-end graphics card. Now, we're hoping that the machine that we're building today will actually be on pretty much compare with this, but also meet the other requirements of being upgraded. So up first, we have the motherboard. Now, we've chosen this Asus A320MK board. Now, this is a pretty budget motherboard. You can pick them up for between £30 and £40. £40 brand new, £30 second hand, and they're not bad boards. They're pretty standard, they're pretty reliable, and this one in particular offers everything that we want. As far as this board goes, we've got an AM4 socket that with a BIOS update will take anything from the A series APUs all the way up to the 3000 series Ryzen processors, so there's good upgrade capability there. It takes DDR4, just 2 slots, but again, that's more than sufficient for a lot of people's machines, particularly on the budget range. We've got a PCI Express slot, and also we've got an M.2 slot drive here for your M.2 drives, so we can get a super fast hard drive for our OSs. Going into this board, we're going to be actually installing one of these. Now, this is the AMD A10 9700 APU. It is an A series processor. They're not as fast as the Ryzen processors, obviously, but you can pick these up pretty cheap. Now, you can get these from CEX because they seem to have survived the inflated prices at the moment for roughly about £30. And they're not bad processors. Because the graphics are built into them, they can pretty much just get you up and running straight away. So this is a 4-core, 4-thread processor using Radeon 7 integrated graphics. Now we'll just take this processor and we'll drop it straight into the board. Now there shouldn't be any need to do anything on the board for this because it will take these processors straight off the bat, and that's installed. For the cooler, we're going to be using an AMD stock cooler. This is an AMD Wraith Stealth, and you can pick them up pretty much for around £5 from Amazon, or if you get lucky on an eBay auction, you can get them even cheaper. Now, usually when you purchase these, they do come with thermal paste on, so you don't need to worry about that, and it's pretty good stuff. It'll work anyway. But for this one in particular, I've used this before, so we're just going to be attaching this to the board, and I will have to use some more thermal paste. Now, the thermal paste I like to use is MX4, but you can get lots of different brands, lots of different qualities. I find this one works pretty well, and it's not that expensive. To fit this cooler, all we need to do is remove the existing 2 brackets from the motherboard because it actually screws into the backplate on its own. There are AMD versions of these coolers that don't do that. Some of the more Wraith Max, which are the bigger ones, or the Wraith Prisms, you can actually just hook them to these clamps so you don't need to remove them. But it's always worth keeping these brackets because if you ever do change it for maybe a third-party one, particularly something like a water cooler or an AIO, you'll want these brackets to be able to plug them on, really. So we just remove these brackets, leaving the back plate in place, and all we need to do is simply install this onto the board. So we'll put a bit of thermal compound on. Now again, there's many different ways of doing thermal compound, and lots of people have their own way of doing it. I tend to just put a bead in the middle and secure it down. For this, all you've got to do is line up the pegs to the screw holes and then start screwing it down in each corner. And all you're looking for really is an equal amount of pressure on each corner until the actual screw stops. Now these are designed to have that stop point, so you're not exactly going to over tighten it. So now that we've got the cooler installed, we're going to be taking a look at the memory. So for this, I've basically picked up just two standard sets of Corsair Vengeance LPX memory. This is pretty basic stuff and it's pretty budget as well. You can pick these up, and this is 8 gigs, so 2 4s of DDR4. These ones in particular are 2666 megahertz, so it's probably on the lower end of scales, but you can pick these up for about £30 for the pair, and being in a pair they're going to give us dual channel capability, so it's going to be a little bit faster than actually just installing one. So we'll just install that straight into the board. Like that. Now for the hard drive, you've got lots of different choices. We could have gone with a more older style hard drive, so something like a mechanical, and we could have got like a terabyte, not that much money. But what we want to do is we want to actually build a good base to upgrade from as we go along. So because this board supports an M.2 slot, I've opted for one of these. Now this is a Kingston technology M.2 drive. It's a 240 gigabyte. You can pick these up for about £30. Which isn't bad, but it's going to give our operating system a super speed it needs, as well as providing just enough space to be able to put a few of our initial games on it. So these drives are really simple to install. On your motherboard, you're going to find the M.2 slot. They'll come with a little standoff and a screw in the top. What you need to do is remove that screw, and because you can get different sized M.2 drives, you can actually move the standoff, but this one's actually set up for the one that we want. You simply slide it into the bracket and then install the screw back over the top so it holds it down. And that drive is installed. This actually finishes the configuration of the board. Everything now is set up on the motherboard. It's pretty simple to do, pretty easy to do, and all we need to do is fit it into our case. Now for our case, we're going to be using a case that we've recently reviewed on the channel. This is the IONz KZ10. It's an ATX case, and it's been chosen specifically because of some of the features it offers for the price that it gives you. Now, this case cost me around £22, but you can pick them up usually for about £32, so it's still a bit of a bargain. It comes with tempered glass, but in particular, and more importantly to us, it comes with a full mesh front, which is going to really help for thermals later on when we're installing fans and things. Obviously the tempered glass, so it's good quality, and we're not going to get any much scratching as you would do on a Perspex piece. And it also comes with an ATX size. Now this is great for us to look at future upgrades, because obviously this board is a micro ATX and it's going to give us plenty of space. If we need to change that board out for something that is even bigger later on, it will give us that opportunity. It'll also fit an ITX motherboard, so if you get hold of one of them instead of the micro ATXs for a good price, it'll also fit in there as well. So what we'll do is we'll drop this straight into the case and we'll start taking a look at other pieces. Now that we've got our motherboard installed, we're ready to have a look at what's going to power all of this. Now there are many different options out there in terms of power supply that you can use on any build. When you're looking at budget power supplies, you're going to get criticism of pretty much any make, any brand, any wattage. But what we've done is we've opted for something that's a little bit on the brand. So this is an EVGA, very good strong brand. It's a 600 watt power supply, and because it's one of their more budget ranges, it does come with the ketchup and mustard cables, and only an 80 plus white, but it's more than enough for a budget machine like this. These can be picked up at the moment for around £35, and there are other brands that are quite good brands that will offer something similar. I know Thermaltake do a version which is very similar, again ketchup and mustard cables, pretty much the same ratings. But at the end of the day, we're putting something in that is a good strong brand, and something on a 600 watt as well, so we can support any kind of upgrades later on in terms of graphics card or extra hard drives, fans, things like that. So actually removing this from the box, I've realised that even though the cables on the advertising pictures for these power supplies are ketchup and mustard, they're actually black in colour. So that's actually quite a bonus really for the price of this PSU, for the brand. So that's going to help us later on with cable management, because it means we're not going to be able to see so much of what we would class as an old typical style power supply. So that's actually a really good sign. So we'll drop this in the case and then we'll start doing a bit of cable management. On this case, obviously your PSU gets installed at the bottom, and we want the fan facing down so that we can actually draw nice cool air into the power supply. But you simply just slide them in like that, and then we just screw it in at the back and start doing a bit of cable management. Now that we have our PSU installed, we need to do a bit of cable management. Now there are the cables from obviously the front I/O port and also the cables from the power supply. Now because we're going to be planning to upgrade this machine going forward, we don't want to tie everything down too much because there's certain things that we want to be able to leave quite accessible. Things like PCI Express power cable, because if we put another graphics card in this later on, we'll need that. A couple of SATAs, we want to be able to leave them accessible so that when we upgrade hard drives and things like that. But basically I tend to use a little bit of a rule when doing some of your basic cable management. Now because this PSU isn't a fully modular one, we have all these cables to deal with. What I tend to like to do is actually put the big ones in first. So looking at your 24 pin, I tend to like to route that one up to where it needs to get to, through somewhere like that. And then also there is your CPU power, which is this one. And they tend to be routed up through the back and through a hole in the top, just up here on the case. Now some cases on your budget range are going to actually be missing some of these channels. So the case that we've got on the back there that we use for the Half-Life build, that actually doesn't have any hole up here. So what we had to do for that one is run the CPU up the side and across the motherboard. I don't like them. I don't think they're very good. I think it's a misstep on their behalf because it just makes things messy. And particularly when they make these cases to actually look good, it's a bit odd that they would do that. Now, because this motherboard uses a 4-pin of the 8-pin that you get on the power supplies, I tend to like to just split them down a little bit and only pop one through the motherboard. It just makes things a little bit cleaner on the other side. Now, as long as you've got space to be able to hide this cable on the other side, clearly on this case we're not going to have it up here where the plug is, so I would actually pull it down to down here and be able to hide it underneath. So we'll get them two installed. We have no other connections on this build to be able to be used at the moment, but obviously, like I said before, we're going to be leaving the PCI Express available and probably one of the SATAs. We don't need Molex anymore, not for most things anyway, unless we put some kind of fan system that requires one in. So I tend to just take these cables, tie them up with a couple of cable ties and hide them down the bottom, usually into the hard drive tray. Then we have all these other cables to install, and this is from the front I/O. So we've got a USB 3, USB 2, HD audio, and then all the things like power switches and resets. Fortunately on this case, because it's actually a reasonably good case for the money, they're also in all the black cabling, so you're going to be able to hide them really, really well. So we'll get them big cables in, we'll hide everything else, and we'll get these installed, and then it's time to be able to get the machine installed. So now that we've got all our cabling in, we've done a bit of cable management. Now, cable management isn't the easiest thing to do, but with this kind of setup, it's not too bad because we don't actually have that many cables running everywhere. All we've managed to do is pin them down into the channel and then to the extra pegs around the base. Now, if you're going to do some cable management, I suggest that you get quite a few of these. These are cable ties. Sometimes your cases will come with them. They'll come in a little bag of accessories. I tend to use a lot of them, so I purchase them separately in big bulk. The last thing to do to this now is actually add a bit of cooling to the system. Now to do that, because we're on a budget, we're just going to install one 120mm case fan. Now this is a case fan that I picked up second hand for £3. They're relatively cheap. It's not the best looking thing, but it will actually work fine. You can install these in either the front or the back. I'm going to install it into the back just for ease, and in another video, when we start looking at upgrading this, we'll look at how we can improve the cooling going forward. So we'll just add this in, and then the last stage is to get Windows installed. Now all you need for that is a USB key. You can go to the Microsoft website and download Windows for free. It's actually a tool that will build a USB stick for you, and that stick will then become a bootable drive that you can plug into the machine, boot it up, and it'll install Windows. We're going to be running this machine unactivated because remember, we're on a budget. It doesn't really restrict that much that you can do, but we'll resolve that later on in another video. So let's get this installed and we'll see what it can do. And here's the final machine. Installing Windows was actually a breeze. It took about 10 minutes to get everything installed, including all the drivers for the graphics and the processor and the chipsets and everything. That's because we fit the M.2 drive. Now, that drivers give us a really good base for our operating system going forward, and we can always add to that as we go. Build-wise, it came out really well. It's a very clean build. Everything's really well tucked away, and making sure that we use this case, it gives us lots of flexibility in the future. The one thing I don't like about this case is actually that you can see through the basement for your PSU, which means we can see all these cables, and if we were to install the hard drive there, we'd see that too. Maybe we'll fix that in another video going forward. Overall, this machine cost around £193. Now, that's a very similar price that you will pay for one of those Dell Optiplexes with putting a graphics card in at the moment, but you are also getting about the same experience in power. Now, talking about some of those cheap eBay machines, in particular where they do use Dell Optiplexes to be able to build them, you're pretty much going to get the same experience in gameplay. And that's because this processor is equivalent to in between a GT710 and a GT1030, and that's pretty much what you get in those machines. So for the money, you're actually going to get pretty much the same thing, but with this machine, you're going to actually have an upgrade path. You'll be able to take it right up to the Ryzen 3000. We can install lots more hard drive space. We can add a discrete GPU, we can add double the memory, and because of the size of the case, we can add lots of more different cooling options. If you want to be able to see the journey we're going to take this machine through, and I'm calling this machine Bertie, it's just a name that came to me, so if you want to see how Bertie evolves over time when we put some more upgrades into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel to see those videos, and if you like this video, make sure you give me a like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.